The recorder is going, and Gualtiero said he wants to add a comment, and I think that's good. And what I would say is that I think among the most interesting discussions possible on the planet, maybe I don't want to make any, I don't want to be too strong about that, but but commentary about how to understand a specific experience, what is said, what is not said, but something that's tied to Gualtiero's, in this case, Gualtiero's in particular experience, and whether he saw it the same way I saw it, or those colloquies, I guess you would say, are, I think, totally interesting, and and I think I could argue that among the most interesting conversations that you can have, because the reason for that, the reason I think that is because I think that there's a more or less true answer to the question, well, what was in Gualtiero's experience at the moment of a beep? And to refine the more or lessness of that, and to make sure that we understand each other, that we're not talking past each other about that. Well, that's in the realm of know thyself and know somebody else, and whatever, which for however many millennia people have said is an important deal. So I'm looking forward to what Gualtiero has to say about this, and Lauren too. So I'm not trying to put pressure on you at all, Lauren. You can look at him or not look at him or whatever. That's we're one of the features of this interaction from my point of view is that we're all free agents, and we can either do it or not do it, and do it however it is we want to do it. And I might have comments about how we do it. I'm happy to have those comments, but we got to be free participants if it's going to be interesting. That's what I think. So that's my opening gambit. Anything else that we should be talking about before we take a look at Gualtiero's samples?
I have some reflections on this whole enterprise, but it might be easier if I bring them up in the context of the beeps and
Okay.
the experiences.
I I what I think the answer to that is, from my point of view, is yes, and that's what I was trying to say. Conversations about specific moments,
Yeah.
not general conversations. General conversations, I think, are like planets revolving around each other. You know, they never get down to the ground. But the about specific moments, I'm 100% in favor of that.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see.
Does it matter in which order I describe the experiences, or
If you have a preference,
take one?
I'd say go for it. I generally go 1 through 6, but I don't have a strong feeling for that.
Okay. Well, there's one that matters to me more than the others because I I was curious to see if I could repeat the experience, the DES with while I was asleep. So and there was a whole discussion about that last time. Maybe we can keep it brief this time. It's just to say that I felt I took a nap again with the earpiece in my ear, and it woke me up again. And it was similar to what happened last time. Namely, I could tell in the moment that I was thinking about something, and maybe I even had some faint images. But then by the time I, stopped the beep and I got the notebook and I got the pencil, I had them like right next to me, but I could not remember anything about the content of the experiences.
Okay.
So really, that's it. But
So let's set aside whether this is similar to or different from beep whatever it was last time, and try to understand this one. So what I understood was that in awakening, while awakening, I understood myself to have been thinking about something. That
Yes.
is, my mind was not blank. It seems to me that my mind was not blank, that I was not just devoid of experience.
Um, yeah, the way I would put it is that at the beep itself, mm, as it woke me up, made me realize in that moment that I was having some stream of thought slash faint images right before, and then the beep itself, but mostly interrupted in there, made me think about the fact that I needed to write notes about it. And um, probably I had some excitement over the fact that my little experiment was successful. Um, but yes, so but then by the time I tried to write it down, I couldn't remember anything about the content that was going on but when the beep came, I was aware of some thought content that was going on.
Okay. And you said something about faint images. Do you have can you is there something more specific about what faint images means?
Um, I'm guessing they were visual, but I didn't
Yeah.
write it down, so it's a kind of mostly a guess that but it's just because if I wrote faint images, and it's an inference that I'm making now that it was probably visual.
Okay. So as a general rule, I don't want us to confuse inference with what I call direct apprehension. And
There.
and I'm recognizing the sort of the inchoateness of this experience. So and I, as a general rule, would prefer to rely on the iterative method rather than to try to grasp what was happening about this particular beep. You know, there are some investigators who think that they can go backwards and ask you to relive this experience or whatever, and try to figure out whether these were visual images or auditory images or whatever other kind of images they might have been. I don't do that because I don't trust it.
It would not work for me. I would not be able to do that.
Okay. Well, I don't think anybody's able to do that, or I think it's fraught. Let's put it that way. I think it's fraught, and and I there's enough debate about whether it is possible to grasp a fully awake experience uh, without. And so I try to do that as basically as well as I can, and and I'm willing to say, well, you know, there's some other stuff out there that maybe there is beyond my ability to reach or our ability to reach.
Oh,
So go ahead.
how much experience or yeah, how much of this have you done with people who were sleeping?
Never.
Never. Oh,
Well, I shouldn't say never because obviously you're one, and other people have warned the people when they're accidentally asleep or whatever, and they fall asleep during the process. But I have never, I've never done a sleep study in particular.
so if people fall asleep, what do they report experiencing when the beep arrives?
It's pretty variable. Some pretty much like you. Some I was asleep and that's all. I can't remember anything.
Does anybody ever say my mind was completely blank and then the beep woke me up and there was nothing there?
Yes.
Because
And,
I'd like to see if that happens to me.
and other people report a full-on dream that they can wake up and there was a dream going
Right,
on.
right.
But I have never investigated it.
No.
The rationale for that is that it is remarkable to me. If you read, for example, an introductory psychology book probably an introductory philosophy book too, but I'm not so familiar with them. You'll find a chapter on the phenomenon of dreaming,
Hmm.
and you won't find a chapter on the phenomenon of awake experience. And that, to my way of thinking, is absolutely remarkable. And I think it comes from the fact that everybody believes that they know what they know about awake experience. I think they're mistaken about that, but everybody believes that. And so it doesn't seem like it's a good idea to have a chapter about that. I'm amazed at that, but I have put most of my, or all of my eggs, most of my eggs into the awake basket rather than the asleep basket. Which
Yeah.
is not to say that sleep isn't important. I think sleep is important. I'd love to know about more about sleep. And beeping people while they're asleep would be fine with me. It has never made it to the priority list for me.
Okay. Should we, do we have more to say about this one or?
I think I'm good about that.
Okay.
What number was that? Just so that I can.
Well, that was the last.
So that was like number six.
It might even have been number 7,
We
but
can figure we can
I'll
figure that
click
out
on
when we
that
get there.
one.
So shall we go
Uh,
back?
yeah, let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
Um, the 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 first beep was seeing a small leaf on the deck in front of me, while also experiencing a unsymbolized thought that was part of a train of thought, but I can't remember the content of that thought. Um, One thing I noticed, um, and that seems to be a general phenomenon, is that I think I talked about this a little bit last time also, but it just seems even more clear to me now that at any time, including at the time of that one beep, that first beep, um, there's there's one item at the center of my attention, or at least more that I'm focusing on more than others, especially when it comes to sensory experiences. But it's surrounded by other items that are also there in the experience to some degree of vividness or focus. Um, and I am at least somewhat aware of other things, not just that leaf. A leaf is not like isolated, like in the middle of nothing. It's on the deck. So even though maybe I'm focusing on that leaf at that very moment, I'm also seeing some of the surrounding deck. And then there's a bunch of others, you know, the deck expands in the visual field. And there's other things that I might not be focusing on, but at least they're like still somewhat there. Um, and I wondered after that beep, I wondered if the beep itself might have sometimes pushed me to select something as being the focus more than it actually was before the beep itself, because I know I have to report on this. So I have to say, what am I experiencing? So like, oh, what am I experiencing at this moment? And so then I have to like pick something, whereas and so there's a slight artifact of the fact that I'm trying to report on what was in the experience. And it makes me select one thing to a degree that it wasn't quite as central to my attention before the beep, if that makes sense.
Well, that makes sense. And all of that's hugely important to me as well as everybody else. And there's a lot that I have to say about that because there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff there. So one of the things that I would say about that is I would like us to be as clear as we can about the fact that we are interested in Gualtiero's experience and we're going to do as best a job as we can to get to that. And that will be short of perfection because Gualtiero is not perfect. Also, Russ is not perfect. Lauren too, for that matter. But but that's the accepted foundation on which we're going to work. But I would like us to aim relentlessly at Gualtiero's experience.
Mhm.
That's one thing. Another thing is it is possible that Russ would squeeze Gualtiero in the direction of one thing. And it's also possible that Gualtiero would feel incorrectly that Russ is squeezing him in the direction of one thing. I don't have a preference. I'm not, I'm by no means trying to say that my locutions have been perfect because I'm well aware of my own imperfections here. But what I would like to say is I don't want to push us in the direction, I don't want to push us in the direction of one thing. I think it's quite possible for there to be multiple things present, including one primary thing and others at some smaller inchoator level. And so I'm happy with that. But so that's number two, I guess. Number three is I don't want us to confuse Gualtiero's experience with what we think about visual perception or whatever. Because it is no doubt the case that if we could examine Gualtiero's retina or LGN or wherever else the neural processing goes, that there is the leaf, and then there's the deck around the leaf, and then there's the yard around the deck around the leaf, and then there's the what Trump said today about the that was still there about what you know without meaning to take any kind of a political position about that, but all the stuff that is in the penumbra of Gualtiero's experiences is definitely there, impacting Gualtiero in some way. I'm fully accepting of that.
Mhm.
The question is whether Gualtiero's experience at a particular moment somehow admits of that or accepts that or brings that into his experience, because it's quite possible that at a moment Gualtiero would be about one leaf. All the rest of that stuff is there, neurally, memorially, whatever. But at the moment, I'm interested in this leaf for whatever reason. That would be fine with me.
Yeah.
And it would also be fine with me for Gualtiero to be, Gualtiero's experience to say, well, I'm interested in the leaf, but I'm also interested in the deck and the yard and the politics and whatever.
Right. 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 Yes.
And so that's part three, which I guess is the visual perceptual nature. And then part four is the presuppositional theoretical nature. Like Gualtiero no doubt has some philosophical views on these subject matters, and his experience may very well be in contradiction to those things or in assent to those things. And our goal is to bracket that, because that's what's interesting to Russ, I guess, and Russ would like it to be interesting to Gualtiero and to Lauren as well. And because if we to the extent that we can get Gualtiero's experience right, well, then that would be a data point about experience in general and consciousness and whatever else we want to be thinking about. To the extent that we allow ourselves to infect Gualtiero's experience with our presuppositional theoretical point of view, well, then we're just orbiting around our theories rather than allowing ourselves to get the experience right. I don't think there's any perfect answer to any of those things, except that we can work at it and see how good we can do at it. and try to be honest with each other about how good we're doing about it. And at the end, we might say, well, we were crappy at it. Or at the end, we might say, well, I think we could try to set all that stuff aside. And we might also be able to say, well, this is the extent to which we could set that stuff aside. Maybe we did a pretty good job, we think, or maybe we didn't do a very good job, or maybe we did 100% good job. For me, the interesting thing is to be as genuinely forthcoming with each other about it as we can be, because I think that's what's interesting.
Yes. And I was trying to be honest about the possibility that the my process of thinking and getting ready to write notes right after the beep influenced my recollection of what I was experiencing beyond, a um, yeah, the most straightforward possible description. And so I tried to be mindful of that up to that.
So that reminds me of I guess number five in my little lecture here, that and that is, what I would encourage us to suspend as part of the bracketing deal for me, to suspend generalizing too much from our samples. So far we've had 5 or 6 or 7 samples that we've looked at.
Yeah.
Let's not try to make too much of a deal about that. I think it's much better to try to get each sample right. And we can talk about the process. I'm happy to have this conversation about the process. But what I don't want us to do is, on the basis of this process, of this sample, or this 4 samples that we've had so far, or however many there are, for us to draw a general conclusion about that.
Yeah.
What I would like us to do is to keep the pressure on trying to do it well, keep the relentlessness on that, and then, so we've got all the information here, so we can always go back and figure out what we thought here. But I think if we keep the pressure on trying to do it right, which does not mean trying to do it one thing, or trying to do it whatever, trying to do it awake or trying to do it asleep or whatever, trying to do it with fidelity.
Yeah.
And I would say, now I've been prattling on here for 15 minutes probably, and not so much aimed at yesterday's beeps or today's beeps, whenever they were, but as part of the general process here. And I think DES is almost always more aimed at tomorrow's sampling than it is about yesterday's sampling. But I want us to get, so what I think I'm doing, to the extent that I know what I'm doing here, that what I think I'm doing is trying to keep us on the path of becoming better at apprehending Gualtiero's experience with fidelity. Even though we're going to fall short at it at every step, including today. But I think we might be able to get better at it. So all that's about tomorrow. So about yesterday or today, are these beefs from yesterday? Are these
This
beefs
morning.
this morning? Beefs from this morning? So there was a leaf, and the leaf is somehow occupying my experience. Maybe all of it, maybe some percentage of it. Can you say more about what the leaf, what your experience was of the leaf?
Yes. So it's a small, roundish, uh, curled or concave brown leaf. I call it a leaf. I'm not even 100% sure it was a leaf, but it was some kind of vegetable, plant matter on the deck. My deck is surrounded by trees, so there's always stuff falling from the trees. Um, so it was roundish, very small, maybe the size of a dime, and it was concave and it was brown, and it was just lying on a board on the deck.
Good. So now let me say that what you have just said about is about the leaf. You have given us a good description of the leaf, which is not what I care about at all, really. And but my interest is in your experience. So is your experience, for example, of the concavity of it, or of the smallness of it, or of the it fell from the treesness of it, or none of the above, or
Not that they fell from the tree, but the size and shape and color and concavity. Yes. So it was there in the experience, not, but not as separate elements of the experience. It was all bound together, if you will.
so I'm
All these
interested.
properties were, presented visually together.
I'm interested in, is this true? I'm asking, and I would say that everything I ever say is always a question at one level or another. But the is it true that my experience is of the visual characteristics of the leaf, as opposed to the it's trash and I got to get rid of it
Yes.
aspect, or the
Yes. Yes.
so I'm involved with the way the leaf looks to me, and not in any particular aspect of it. It's not the greenness of it or the curlness of it or the concavity of it, but the is that true?
Um, Yes, it was just a fleeting experience. So as usual, this beeping process and then the description makes it sound like there was some, you know, it almost makes it sound like it was a static experience that occurred for a period of time, and it gave me all this time to, understand what I was experiencing or whether I was having any further thoughts about the experience. But in reality, it was just a fleeting moment. I was maybe walking on the deck or moving. I was moving on the deck, and it just happened that at that moment, right before the beep, my eyes were, or the leaf was present in my experience just for a very small fraction of a second. So it didn't really, I didn't have time to like think about, oh, like, am I this leaf, oh, it's concave, it's brown, it's this, it's that. It was just the visual presentation of the leaf itself for just a very fleeting moment.
So I guess I got a couple of things to say about that too. What, well, let me ask a couple of questions first. The what I'm understanding is that for at least at the moment of this beep, for whatever reason, my eyeballs have fallen on this leaf, and I am in somehow regarding or attracted to or interested in or whatever the visual characteristics of this leaf. And my interest is not in the botany of it. I don't really care what kind of a leaf it is. And I
No, and
don't,
I'm not even sure it is a leaf. It
doesn't matter to me.
could be a leaf, but it's some kind of thing that must have come from a plant. I don't know. That's the look of it.
So what I would notice about that is that you are quite confident about your experience here. Your experience is not of the leafness of it. You don't even give a shit whether
No,
it's a leaf.
no, I'm not even sure it is a leaf. No, right. I'm
It,
using the word leaf just because I need to use some word
fine.
for it.
I'm totally happy with that.
Yeah.
And so I guess the second thing is I would say that most people, when they describe what I would take as being a sensory awareness here, and by in my lexicon, a sensory awareness is an interest in or attraction to or whatever some characteristic of the world, whether that's in the inner world or the outer world, which doesn't have any necessarily instrumental nature to it. It's not like I'm trying to figure out something about this. It's not like I'm trying to sweep it aside. It's not like but I just, it interests me at this particular moment. And what I would say about people who describe sensory awareness like this for the first time, they do it pretty much like you have just done it. And what I would say about that is you're a little bashful about it or shy about it or whatever. You want to say, well, this is not a big deal. This is just a transitory thing. I just happened to it. That's that's the way people describe sensory awareness. And what I think about that why people do that, which it's not my job to actually to try to figure out why people do things, but what I think is that you are, for whatever reason, attracted to this leaf for the moment. You could have been attracted to a whole lot of other stuff. There's trees out there, and there's wood out there, and there's upcoming conversation with Russ, and there's what Trump said, and there's all different kinds of stuff that could have been occupying you at that moment, but you were attracted to this leaf for whatever reason. And I would say that attraction is very close to the sensuality of attraction is very close to the sensuality of sexuality. This is what Gualtiero is interested in. This is what appeals to Gualtiero at a particular moment. And people are shy about saying what attracts them. People don't go around saying to other people, I'm attracted to you. And I think for good reason, people don't do that. And genetically, if you say that about the king's wife, then your genetic material ends or whatever. So there's lots of reasons why we are reticent to describe sensual aspects. So that's a theory. We can take or leave that theory. We can bracket that theory away like every other kind of a theory. Well, my interest is not in the theory. My interest is in helping Gualtiero accept that a sensory interest is a important part of the human condition.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just add as a qualification that in this case, I wouldn't describe what happened as me being interested in the leaf or attracted to the leaf, but more as the leaf being more or less by accident in the main foveal area of my visual attention at the time of the beep. So it felt more like an accident than the result of any kind of selection of the leaf on my part for more focused attention.
Okay. I'm happy with that. But as long as we don't give it any more significance than about this particular beep, it seemed like I was sort of accidentally attracted to or accidentally noticing the leaf.
Mhm.
That's the way it seems to me. That's fine. What I don't want us to do is to prejudice any future beeps one way or the other about that. Because it could be that a whole lot of things are accidental, or it could be that they're not. And either one of those things is fine with me.
Yes.
Is there anything else to be said about your experience at the moment of this beep?
No.
Okay. Lauren, you got questions about that? Number 2.
Okay. Next beep.
Yep.
Good. So the next beep caught me while I was walking on the deck while talking to my dog Cinnamon, and I was saying the word sbagliatus, which is a made-up word that is inspired by the Italian word sbagliato. But I have these words that I make up with my dog, and I talk to her that way. But I didn't complete the word. I stopped at sbaglia because of the beep. So the beep kind of caught me mid-word, and I didn't complete the word because the beep said beeped, and I started thinking about, okay, so what was I experiencing? So I was aware of saying the word. I was hearing the word being spoken by me. Um, my body walking on the deck. So I had kind of a kinesthetic sense of me walking on the deck. And the floor of the deck, I think I was looking at the floor. So I was seeing it. So I was seeing it. So I had a visual experience of the deck and of my own body walking and of the word I was saying, both in terms of feeling like that I'm speaking and hearing the result of that. Um, so in this case, I think I tried to avoid what worried me about the previous beep, that the excessive focus on the leaf might be partially an artifact of me trying to report what was the content of my experience in particular, as opposed to a wider range of things that I might have been experiencing. So here I have a whole list in this case, because I was trying to be more inclusive, not miss anything. And then it occurred to me that it might be easier to do this if the beep stopped by itself, because there's this extra operation of turning off the beep that might contribute to distracting me, at least, from remembering what I was experiencing.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning here, and we'll come back to the stopping of the beep. So, in the current rendition, it seems like there were five-ish, I guess, things that were candidates for experience. Let's leave it at that. One was saying Bagliato. One was hearing myself say Bagliato. One was my body walking, kinesthetics of my body walking. And one
Mhm.
was seeing the floor.
Yes.
And does it make sense for me? Is it reasonable for me to ask what percentage of my overall experience I was engaged in any of these things? And I don't really care about the accuracy of numbers, but are we talking 25, 25, 25, 25, or are we talking about 95, 4, 3 or whatever?
Yeah, it does make sense. I would say that the word, both speaking it and hearing it, which were not really distinct in my experience. This is sort of my attempt at being comprehensive and capturing both aspects. Because, in the way I experienced it, it was probably just one thing, but within that one thing, I think we can list both the sense of saying and the sense and the hearing of the result of the saying, because I don't think those are the same things, even experientially, but they're kind of fused together, in the experience. Um, so that part I would say was more than 50%, maybe 60%, let's say. And the other two aspects, the sense of walking and the deck were maybe more like 20% each, something a little bit smaller.
Okay. So let's start with the Baglietto word.
Yes.
The fact, the, the fact of the universe is that Gualtiero is saying Baglietto.
Should I spell it just for
Yeah,
um
that'd be good.
having an accurate transcript? It's spelled well, the Italian word sbagliato is spelled S as in Sam, B as in Bob, A, G as in George, L as in Larry, I, A, T as in Tom, O.
That's pretty much what I had, except I didn't have the S, actually.
Oh, yeah. There's an S at the beginning, yes. That's a little tricky in this case.
So I would say, as an aside, since we're talking about method kind of a thing, as an aside, is I didn't ask you to spell it. And the reason that I didn't ask you to spell it is that I didn't want to say that I really care about how it's spelled. What I care about is what your experience is. Sooner or later, I would have had to have asked you how it's spelled, but part of the relentless, what I would call the relentless focus on the experience is I, it's not of primary interest to me how it's spelled, because that way to ask about that would be to awaken some kind of a conversation about the silent S and silent G or whatever, and the etymology and how, and I think all that stuff doesn't really matter as far as Gualtiero's experience is concerned at this moment. Might matter at some other time. So that's one thing. And again, that's a comment aimed at tomorrow, not so much about today. I am wanting to articulate and model the skill of focusing on Gualtiero's experience. There's a lot of things that are interesting in the world. Etymology of quasi-Italian phrases is one of them, but it's not Gualtiero's experience. So that's one thing. Another thing is about the distinction between saying Baglietto and hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is possible to have the experience of saying without having the experience of hearing. In the world of perception, the world of perception involves both the world of speaking involves both articulation and hearing and feedback among those. And it's obvious, it's easy to demonstrate that. You can put earplugs on and people start talking louder if they got earphones on. So it's clear there's clearly a feedback neurologically, I guess you could say, or perceptually, or whatever. But that does not necessarily mean experientially. So I think it's possible for speaking to be experienced as both a speaking and a hearing. And I think it's also possible for speaking to be experienced just as speaking, and I don't experience myself really as hearing it. Obviously, I am hearing it, but I don't experience it. And this is maybe the one that's the most surprising, I think it's also possible to experience speaking entirely as hearing. So I obviously am speaking. These words are coming out of my mouth and I'm driving it or whatever. But I think it's fairly common experience for that to be apprehended as heard. I hear myself saying it. And that hearing is very much the same experience as Gualtiero hearing Russ speak or hearing Lauren speak or hearing his own voice coming out of a tape recorder. Those are experientially very different. So this is another lecture aimed at tomorrow, basically. But I would like us to not take for granted. This is a bracketing of presuppositions lecture. I would like us to not take for granted the perceptual realities of the physical world, which do in fact involve both hearing and speaking, and aim us at the experience. And so the question is, at this particular moment, do I feel myself to be saying something to my dog, or do I experience myself to be hearing myself say something to my dog? or both, or the question doesn't make sense, or
Yes. I mean, I think it makes sense, and that's why I described the experience that way, as including both.
okay. So I understand myself to be both speaking and hearing myself speak, and that is an experiential expression, not a driven by theory expression.
To the extent possible, yes.
Okay. Well, I think to the extent possible is always an important deal, and I think having these conversations will perhaps make it easier for us to separate those things apart on our next sampling day,
Hmm.
which is why much of the conversation about sampling has to be about tomorrow, and why DES interviews have to take place over the long haul. We can't just do them on one or 2 days because we've got to figure out. So Russ is trying to figure out what Gualtiero is trying to tell him, and and he's trying to sort through, is Gualtiero telling me something based on his understanding of auditory perception, or based on presuppositions about theory, or based on experience? And Russ has no way of knowing that because he's not a mind reader. He is trying to get Russ and Gualtiero into a position where they can talk to each other in a way that both of them know what the other guy's saying.
Yeah, and I don't think it's even entirely possible to discriminate between all these options for myself because the thought process itself is largely non-transparent. So the thought process of, or the process of generate the description of the experience. So it's not like I can sort of identify every thread in the process that led to the description of that experience before the beep and say, oh yeah, okay, here's like theory influencing the, or this particular theory is influencing my output here at this point. I'm doing the best I can to tell you what I was experiencing.
So I totally buy that. I what I and what I would I guess what I would say is that what I would like us to do is to recognize that it is possible to be saying something as the result of theory, and it's possible to be saying something as the result of direct apprehension of experience, and all kinds of mixtures of those.
Well, partly because even the experience itself could be influenced by theories that you'll have in the sense that your concepts, your assumptions might allow you to experience things in different ways, depending
So
on which assumptions you have or which theories you have.
I totally agree with that. But from my point of view, that doesn't change the fact that it's still possible to try to separate away the theory from the direct apprehension.
Mhm.
Lauren, you were going to say something?
I did. I have a quick question. So are we talking about trying to separate the actual in the moment experience from what you later on go back and think about it and try and connect what those experiences were after? Because I can think about a moment where there's speech and I'm hearing the speech, and then later I'm thinking about the speech that was said, and then I assume that I possibly experienced it also coming out of my mouth and hearing it. And so that assumed part we want out, and we just want the actual feeling or experience in the moment. Is that what we're talking about, kind of thing?
Yes, that's his best, and do that as best we can, which, as Gualtiero has pointed out, might be impossible on the way in because his theories shape his experience, and might be possible on the way out as well. And and I will be totally happy if we get to the end and you say, well, we can't. It's not possible to tease those kinds of things apart. If we, as long as we've tried, if we haven't tried to tease them apart because we're totally captivated by our own theory, for example. I'm not saying that's the way it is, but I have met some people who are pretty captivated by their own theory, and it wouldn't occur to them to really try to hear any contradictory evidence. Let's put it that way. As long as we have tried, then I can say when we get to the end, we'll have a data point that's worth talking about. But if we don't try, then we'll just assent to some theory or other. We might as well not have done this. Did that answer your question? So about the walking, I am maybe 20% experiencing the kinesthetics of my walking.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Did you say what does that mean?
Well, what I said that isn't what I said, but what I really mean is what was your experience which comes out in words, I was experiencing the kinesthetics of my walking. I want to know what your experience was.
Okay, so it's hard to say more, but it's just a sense of my own body in motion, in a walking motion.
Whole body,
Yes,
legs, feet, arms, hands, head, the whole deal.
I'd say so. Yeah, the whole body. I cannot guarantee that in that 20% of my experience that was sort of containing that, there wasn't some further differentiation, and maybe the head itself might not have been. If I, to the best of my ability, I would say maybe the head was not as much in the experience, but more the rest of the body, because the head is sort of being carried, I guess. It's not moving on its own. But all of this is elaboration that I'm doing now. To the extent that I can remember the experience itself, it was just a sense of my whole body moving, walking in a walking motion.
So what I'm trying to do, which is what I almost always do on the second or whatever day of sampling, is to try to understand what Gualtiero means when he says I've got a kinesthetic sense of my body.
Yes.
And does he mean, well, to be complete, I was walking and therefore I must have had some kinesthetic sense. And so I'm going to report I have a kinesthetic sense. Or is it a kinesthetic sense that I had at the moment of the beep, but minorly? And I don't want to discount the hard part of my job, I guess I would say. The hard part of my job is I don't want to discount the possibility of having a small part of my experience engaged in the experience of the kinesthetics of my walking.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I don't want us to say, well, I was walking and therefore I must have had a kinesthetic sense of my walking. That's my art, I guess you would say, to try to convey that I'm indeed interested in your experience without it being driven by some
Yes.
perceptual assumption. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and again, to the extent that I can try to be as faithful as possible to what I was experiencing, I'd say that was a kinesthetic experience of walking. It's not just an inference based on the fact that since I was walking, there must be something there.
Okay. And so far, we haven't yet been able to say at the moment of the beep that kinesthetic sense was mostly in my legs or mostly in my arms.
No, it was more diffuse than that. It was more of the whole body moving.
Mm-hmm. And the whole body moving can be, I guess, what we could call a kinesthetic sense. I feel I feel the joints in action,
Mhm.
or it could be a whole body through space. I feel the progression, a bodily progression of my body moving from this point to the next point.
I'm not sure I understand that distinction. It, I would describe it as just a sense of the body moving from the inside, this internal sense of my body moving. And I don't know if it helps, but I've practiced Tai Chi um, for about 30 years daily, and so that is a practice that in which you develop over time more awareness of of everything that's happening in the moment, but especially your own body and the alignment of the body and the parts of the body, how they all fit together. But you're aiming for a holistic sense of what's happening in your body at that moment. So it's something that I've cultivated through this practice for many years. So maybe that shed some light on what I might have been experiencing.
So the so the distinction. So I'm the distinction that I was exploring, I guess you'd say, is kinesthetic is about flexion and extension and joint movement and something like that, in my understanding.
Mhm.
And the alternative was something like translation, where moving, my body is moving across the universe.
Yes.
And and both of those would have been consonant with the description of I'm somehow wearing my body moving across the deck.
Yes.
And so I would like to know whether you meant to make a distinction between there, that this was a bodily movement. I'm feeling generally my body joints flexing against each other, or
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
myself moving across the deck.
It's a good, okay, I get it now. And I would say, again, to the extent like I can reconstruct, I would say it's both.
Mhm.
It's both. There's both a sense of internal moving and also a sense of moving relative to the surrounding environment.
Okay. And then my eyeballs are aimed at the deck or the floor or whatever.
Yeah, the horizontal part of the deck
Okay.
where I'm walking.
And and so I am clearly accepting that your eyeballs are connected to your retina, are connected to your LGN, are connected to your visual cortex and wherever else they go, and that you are responding to that skillfully in the sense that you're not tripping over the chair or whatever. But that does not necessarily mean that you are experiencing that before the footlights of your consciousness. And doesn't mean that you're not. I just want us to not presume.
Yeah.
And it's the same deal. I could call your attention right now to your backside. And your backside has been sitting on the chair now for the last half an hour or an hour. And you probably haven't spent much time thinking about it or experiencing it or whatever, but you've been skillfully dealing with it. You haven't fallen off the chair. And
Right.
so what I don't want us to do is to presume that just because my eyes are open and aimed at something, that I have to have been experiencing that any more than because I haven't fallen off the chair, I must have been attending to the chair. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't.
Right. Yeah. But I would say in this case, I was experiencing
Okay.
the floor of the deck.
And what do you see?
I see, brown boards, brown wooden boards.
Brown,
They're
brown,
painted brown. The paint in some places, the paint is kind of vanishing, but and I can't, in this case, I don't know that I have any, I have no recollection of exactly the state of the paint, but there's like these boards.
And do I see the boards sort of moving as I move across them? So I see a board moving towards me, or do I?
Yeah, or, you know, it, I think the experience is fairly described as I'm moving relative to the boards.
Okay.
The boards themselves are not moving.
So I accept that as being the correct statement about the universe. The question is whether your experience is connected to that.
I think so, yes.
So what I in the world according to Hurlburt, the experience and the universe are not directly connected to each other.
Well,
And so
I agree with that.
I can be thinking about a castle in Spain and having never saw a castle in Spain. Actually, I have seen a castle in Spain, but I could be thinking about it, and it has nothing to do with my experience today, or not much to do that. So my experience is not, and while I'm doing that, and my eyes might be open, I could be driving, skillfully driving, and thinking entirely about a castle in Spain, and my eyeballs are engaged in the task of weaving in and out of traffic without that being in my experience at all. My directly apprehended experience at all. I'm pretty confident that that happens to me and a lot of other people, maybe to Gualtiero. But so this again, I think almost everything, maybe everything that I have said today is much more about tomorrow than it is about these beeps. I am I want what I want to do is I want to be distinctly in favor of hearing about minor experience such as watching the deck planks move across my visual field, if that is part of my directly apprehended experience, but not if it is part of my theoretical understanding that if my eyes are open and I'm perambulating successfully, then I must be seeing that.
Right.
And I also want to be I want to express myself as being fundamentally happy is that if we were to get to the end of our sampling together and get to the point where I can't make those distinctions. You're asking me to make distinctions that I don't think are possible or that I have found are not possible. That would be totally fine with me.
Okay.
That, that is what I think is the interesting thing about what we're doing here. I'm trying to figure out what's going on in Gualtiero's experience because I think experience is interesting. I think Gualtiero's is interesting. I'd like to know about what his experience is. And I got to sort through things. He's got to sort through things so that we can understand what we're talking about.
Sounds good.
So we've gotten 2 beeps in 2 hours and 2 minutes so far. And shall we try for a third, or shall we say this is enough for today? And or I guess maybe with 3 beeps. I lied because we talked about beep number 6 first.
Yes.
But
those were the most interesting. We got the most interesting in.
Yeah. So I want to say one more thing before we hang up here. What I would like us to do is to say, well, whatever it is that we talked about today, and whatever Hurlburt said about it, and whatever I said about it, whatever anybody said about it, let's bracket that away. We said I was seeing the boards move across my visual field, and Hurlburt asked me about that. Well, I don't know what I said about that, whether that was true. I don't know what Gualtiero said about that, whether that was true. Let's see whether we can start fresh next time. Assuming we're going to do this again next time. But let's see whether we can get at Gualtiero's experience as best we can get at Gualtiero's experience without prejudicing it with any specifics of what we said or didn't say today.
Okay.
Which is not to say that what we said today isn't important. It's that it it might not have been perfectly stated, and so we wish to reserve the right to revise and extend our remarks or whatever our abilities.
Okay.
So shall we do it again?
Yes.
And let's see. And I will send that as a calendar invite and also send you an email. I sent you an email yesterday, actually, to remind you of today. Did you get that?
Thank you. Yes, I did. Oh,
And
I found it. I found your cell phone. Yes. Okay.
and it's my practice to provide reminders because that keeps us all on it's the same page. But I could do it by text if you prefer, or email is fine. Whatever.
Email's perfectly fine. And hopefully I don't need a reminder, but it's very considerate of you to send one.
I find that this time of the year is when people actually need the most reminders because we're changing from one schedule to a different schedule. But I what I'll the reminder, I'm going to program the reminder right now, so it's going to go by delayed email or whatever,
Right.
and that just keeps me on track as well.
Very good. Very good.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'll look forward to whatever comments you want to make about the first interview, and I will hopefully get commentary made sometime along this week about this interview.
Yes, and I'm finding this fruitful. It helps me think about all the stuff things that I'm interested in. So thank you.
All righty. Thank you all very much.
Bye, Lauren.
See you.